Welcome to a tale of justice, resilience, and shocking revelations. In a quiet southern town with a history of hidden traditions, an outsider arrives, only to uncover a culture of unchecked power. This is the story of Lucas Ryder, a seasoned law enforcement officer stepping into his new role as chief of police. But little did the town, or its troublemaking deputies, know. Their twisted antics would come to a head in a way no one expected. Get ready to follow a riveting journey of suspense, unexpected turns, and a fight to bring dignity and justice to a community long overlooked. The late afternoon sun bathed the streets of Millhaven, South Carolina, in golden light as Lucas Ryder stepped out of his truck. Wearing a simple flannel shirt and an old cap, he looked every bit the wandering traveler, not the newly appointed chief of police. This was intentional. Lucas wanted to see Millhaven with fresh eyes before stepping into his official role. The town had a certain charm, brick buildings lining Main Street, a cafe with a hand-painted sign, and locals chatting outside the hardware store. But beneath the surface, Lucas felt a tension he couldn't quite put his finger on. He pushed open the door to the Rusty Rooster Cafe, a spot he'd been told was the town's unofficial gathering place. The scent of coffee and frying bacon hit him as he stepped inside. But so did the stares. Conversations halted as a dozen pairs of eyes appraised the newcomer. Lucas kept his expression neutral, walking to the counter and ordering a coffee to go. Two deputies sitting in a corner booth caught his attention. One was tall and wiry, with a perpetual smirk. The other was stocky, with a demeanor that screamed intimidation. Their badges gleamed under the dim light, but their attitudes lacked polish. "Hey, stranger," the wiry one called out as Lucas turned to leave. "You lost? Don't see folks like you around here much." "Just passing through," Lucas replied calmly, ignoring their chuckles. He stepped out, but he could feel their eyes boring into his back. The next morning, Lucas decided to take a run along the outskirts of town. The crisp air and quiet countryside seemed perfect for clearing his head. As he jogged along the gravel road, the crunch of tires behind him made him glance over his shoulder. The patrol car rolled up alongside him, and the two deputies from the cafe leaned out. "Morning, jogger," said the wiry one, whose name tag read Carter. "Didn't think you'd still be here." "Just enjoying the scenery," Lucas said, keeping his tone even. The stocky one, Reed, smirked. "You know, strangers in Millhaven have to follow some rules. You wouldn't want to break any, would you?" Before Lucas could respond, Carter hopped out of the car, getting uncomfortably close. "Let's see what you've got on you," he said, patting Lucas down without asking. Lucas stood still, resisting the urge to react as Carter pulled a piece of paper from his pocket. "Well, look at this," Carter sneered, holding it up like it was contraband. "It's a receipt," Lucas replied dryly. But Carter wasn't done. He grabbed Lucas's arm, his smirk widening. "How about you come with us? Let's show you how we welcome folks around here." As Lucas was dragged back toward the center of Millhaven, he stayed quiet, letting the deputies dig their own hole. He had seen plenty in his years on the force, but this level of arrogance was something else. The scene that unfolded next would set the stage for a reckoning Millhaven wouldn't soon forget. The morning bustle in Millhaven's town square came to an abrupt halt when Carter and Reed hauled Lucas into the open space like a prized trophy. The deputies were grinning ear to ear, their uniforms crisp but their intentions anything but professional. A few townsfolk glanced over in mild interest, but no one seemed particularly shocked. It was as if this kind of spectacle had become routine. "Ladies and gentlemen," Carter announced. his voice dripping with theatrical flair. "We've got ourselves a troublemaker. A real big city rebel. Wondering where he doesn't belong." Lucas kept his face neutral. But inside, he was quietly assessing the scene. A handful of locals began to gather, some pulling out phones to record, others watching with arms crossed and smirks on their faces. It was clear that Carter and Reed had staged these public humiliations before, and the townspeople treated him as free entertainment. "Now, let's see," Reed chimed in, his deep voice booming across the square. "What do you think he's up to?" "Carter, maybe a little trespassing, or something worse." Carter nodded solemnly, playing up the drama. "Could be. Guess we'll have to keep him here while we figure it out." With that, the two deputies tied Lucas to the large lamppost in the center of the square. Using a length of rope they seemed to have ready for just such an occasion. The act was deliberate, exaggerated, and designed for maximum humiliation. Lucas didn't resist. Instead, he watched, letting them dig themselves deeper. "Smile for the camera," Carter quipped, pointing at the growing crowd of onlookers with their phones raised. The situation turned more surreal as a couple of kids laughed and took selfies in front of Lucas, while older residents whispered among themselves, some shaking their heads in mild disapproval but none stepping forward to intervene. Carter stepped closer, his face smug. "Bet you're regretting wandering into our little slice of heaven." "Huh?" Lucas met his gaze, his calm demeanor never faltering. "Not at all. In fact, this is giving me exactly the insight I was looking for." Carter's smirk faltered for a split second, but he quickly covered it with a laugh. "Insight? Into what? How to follow the rules?" "Something like that," Lucas said cryptically. The crowd continued to swell, with murmurs of curiosity mixing with chuckles. But then something unexpected happened. A young woman in her early 20s stepped forward, holding up her phone and pointing it directly at Carter and Reed. "Hey," she called out, her voice steady but loud enough to carry. "What's this guy even done? Why's he tied up like this?" Carter rolled his eyes. "Just keeping our town safe. Missy, you do well to mind your own business." The woman didn't back down. "I am minding my business, by recording this. You know, for the internet." That got their attention. Carter and Reed exchanged a glance, their confidence wavering ever so slightly. "Look," Reed started, his voice gruff, "we're just having a little fun. It's not hurting anyone. Doesn't look like fun to me." The woman shot back, stepping closer. "Looks like harassment. And now the whole world's going to see it." By now, several other people had started filming more intentionally, sensing that the spectacle was taking a darker turn. Carter's smirk faltered again as he scanned the growing crowd. Reed shifted uncomfortably but tried to mask it with a bark of laughter. Lucas, still tied to the lamppost, observed the cracks forming in their bravado. "Seems like your little show isn't going over as well as you hoped," he remarked casually. Reed spun toward him, his expression hardening. "Keep your mouth shut." But it was too late. The videos were already being uploaded, shared, and spread across social media. Lucas had noticed several cars pulling up nearby, and among them were vehicles marked with the logos of local news outlets. Cameras and microphones were being unpacked, and reporters started mingling with the crowd, asking questions. "Is it true this man was detained without cause?" one journalist asked, pointing a mic toward Carter. "Care to explain why he's tied up like that?" another chimed in. Carter's smirk was now completely gone, replaced with a defensive scowl. "We're doing our jobs, keeping the peace," he muttered, but his voice lacked conviction. Reed leaned in close to Carter. "We need to shut this down," he whispered harshly. But the growing crowd made that impossible. The deputies were trapped in the spectacle they had created. Lucas decided it was time to push the situation further. "If I were you," he said calmly, "I'd start thinking about how to explain this to the chief of police." Reed turned to him with a sneer. "Oh, yeah, and why's that?" Lucas gave him a small, knowing smile. "Because you're looking at him." The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. For a moment, it seemed like the entire square went silent. Carter and Reed froze, their faces a mix of shock and disbelief. The crowd, sensing the shift in tone, began murmuring louder. "You're joking," Carter said, his voice shaky. "Am I?" Lucas asked, tilting his head. "You could have checked, but I guess it's easier to assume someone's a nobody when you think you're untouchable." Reed took a step back, his mouth opening and closing like he wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. Carter's face turned pale as realization dawned. The reporters, now fully engaged, began shouting questions at the deputies. "Is this true? Did you really detain your new chief of police?" Carter stammered, his confidence shattered. "We didn't know. That much is clear," Lucas interrupted, his voice steady and sharp. "But it's too late for excuses now." As the weight of their mistake crashed down on them, the growing crowd sensed they were witnessing the beginning of a reckoning. And for Carter and Reed, the realization was sinking in. They had made the gravest error of their careers. The silence following Lucas Ryder's revelation didn't last long. The town square erupted in whispers, gasps, and shocked expressions as people tried to process what they had just heard. Carter and Reed, the once arrogant deputies, stood frozen in place, their smug confidence replaced by pure panic. "You're lying," Carter finally managed to stammer, though his voice lacked conviction. Lucas tilted his head, his calm demeanor unshaken. "I'm sure the department records can clear that up for you. Go ahead, call the station." The reporters seized the moment, their cameras zooming in on the deputies' faces. Microphones were thrust forward as questions rained down. "Deputy Carter, Deputy Reed, did you really detain your own police chief? Was this a setup?" Carter's face turned beet red as he struggled to form a response. Reed, meanwhile, looked ready to bolt, his hands clenched at his sides as if holding back a tidal wave of regret. "Enough," Reed bellowed, his voice cracking under the strain. This is all a misunderstanding. We didn't know who he was." Lucas raised an eyebrow. "So it's okay to humiliate strangers as long as they're not your boss?" Reed's mouth opened, but no sound came out. The crowd murmured louder, their expressions shifting from curiosity to disgust. People who had laughed earlier now looked uncomfortable, realizing they had unwittingly condoned this behavior for far too long. The growing tension was interrupted by the sound of screeching tires as another patrol car pulled up to the edge of the square. Out stepped Captain Meredith Lane, the third highest-ranking officer in the Millhaven Police Department. Her sharp uniform and steely gaze commanded instant attention. "Deputies," she barked, her voice cutting through the noise like a whip. "What the hell is going on here?" Carter and Reed turned toward her like two guilty schoolchildren caught red-handed. "Captain Lane," Carter began, his voice trembling. We didn't know." You didn't know?" Lane snapped, her eyes narrowing. "Didn't know what? Exactly? That you're supposed to act like professionals? That tying a civilian, or your superior, to a lamppost is a gross abuse of your authority?" The crowd watched with bated breath, the situation escalating into something far bigger than anyone had anticipated. Lane turned to Lucas, her expression a mix of confusion and apology. "Chief Ryder," she said, addressing him formally, "is this true?" Lucas nodded. I thought I'd take a look around town before officially reporting in. What I found was a pair of deputies who seemed to think their badges give them the right to make a mockery of this community, and of the department. Lane's jaw tightened, and she turned back to the deputies. Untie him, now. Carter and Reed scrambled to comply, fumbling with the knots as the cameras continued to capture their every move. Lucas stepped away from the lamppost, brushing off his sleeves and straightening his posture. Even without his badge visible, he radiated authority. The crowd had grown larger, and the mood had shifted completely. People whispered among themselves, their voices tinged with a mix of outrage and shame. The young woman who had spoken up earlier crossed her arms, her phone still recording. "This isn't the first time they've done something like this," she said loudly, addressing the crowd more than anyone in particular. "Everyone here knows it." Her words sent ripples through the assembly. A middle-aged man stepped forward, his face etched with frustration. "She's right. Carter and Reed have been pulling stunts like this for years. Intimidating people, making them feel small. We've all seen it." Another voice chimed in, an older woman with a cane. "And we've all stayed quiet because they have badges. But this is too far." Lucas listened, letting the townsfolk air their grievances. The momentum was building, and he knew this was the moment to set things straight. He raised a hand, and the square gradually fell silent. "I appreciate your honesty," Lucas began, his voice steady but firm. "And I want you to know that this stops today. This department will no longer tolerate abuse of power, whether it's targeting outsiders or your own neighbors. No one is above the law, not even those who enforce it." His words were met with a smattering of applause, but the crowd's mood was still heavy with tension. Lucas turned to Captain Lane. "I trust you'll take immediate action to address this incident." Lane nodded sharply. "Consider it done, Chief." Lucas wasn't finished. He stepped closer to Carter and Reed, who now looked more like schoolboys awaiting detention than law enforcement officers. "You two have not only embarrassed yourselves but have tarnished the reputation of this entire department. Effective immediately. You're both suspended pending an internal investigation." Reed's face turned ghostly pale. "Suspended? But this isn't a negotiation." Lucas cut him off. "Turn in your badges and weapons. Now." The crowd watched in stunned silence as the two deputies reluctantly complied, removing their badges and sidearms and handing him over. The weight of their actions finally seemed to sink in as they realized there was no escape from the consequences. By the time Lucas left the square, the footage of the incident was already spreading online like wildfire. Clips of him tied to the lamppost, the deputy's taunts, and the moment he revealed his identity were racking up thousands of views by the hour. News outlets from across the state picked up the story, framing it as a shocking exposé of small-town corruption. Back at the station, Lucas found himself inundated with calls, some from concerned citizens, others from reporters hungry for more details. But amidst the chaos, he remained focused. This wasn't just about punishing Carter and Reed. It was about dismantling a toxic culture and rebuilding trust in the department. As he sat in his office that evening, Lucas reflected on the day's events. The fight was far from over, but he felt a sense of resolve. Millhaven needed a wake-up call, and if today was any indication, they had just gotten it. The question now was how the town, and its officers, would respond. The next morning, the air in Millhaven was thick with tension. The fallout from the previous day's events had rippled through the town like a shockwave. The local newspaper's front page was plastered with a still frame from one of the viral videos, Lucas Ryder tied to the lamppost, flanked by Carter and Reed in mid-laugh. The headline read, Welcome to Millhaven, small town. Big scandal. At the police station, Lucas's presence was unmistakable. His calm but authoritative demeanor had already begun to change the atmosphere. Officers who had previously turned a blind eye to Carter and Reed's antics were now walking on eggshells. It was clear that this was no longer business as usual. Lucas sat at his desk, reviewing personnel files and complaint records. The more he uncovered, the clearer it became that Carter and Reed's behavior was just the tip of the iceberg. Complaints about harassment, misconduct, and abuse of power had been quietly filed away for years, ignored by a culture that valued loyalty over accountability. The phone on his desk buzzed. It was Captain Lane. "Chief," she said, her voice firm but cautious. "You might want to come down to the conference room. We've got visitors." Lucas sighed and rose, his mind already racing through possibilities. When he entered the room, he found two sharply dressed men in suits waiting for him. Their crisp demeanor and no-nonsense expressions gave them away immediately. Internal Affairs. Chief Ryder, the taller of the two, said, extending a hand. "Agent Malcolm, and this is Agent Torres. We're with the state's Department of Internal Oversight. We're here about the situation with Deputies Carter and Reed." Lucas shook their hands and gestured for them to sit. "I figured this would get state attention. What can I do for you?" Agent Malcolm opened a folder and slid it across the table. Inside were pages of complaints and incident reports, many of which Lucas had already reviewed. "Chief, we've been keeping an eye on Millhaven for a while," Malcolm explained. "Yesterday's incident was just the catalyst we needed to step in officially." Lucas nodded. "I've been going through these files myself. It's worse than I thought." Agent Torres leaned forward. "It usually is. But we're not just here for Carter and Reed. We need to understand how deep this goes. We'll need full access to your records, personnel, and any documentation you have." "You'll have everything," Lucas said firmly. "My goal is to root out this culture completely." Malcolm exchanged a glance with Torres. "That's good to hear, Chief. But I hope you're prepared. This is going to get messy." Meanwhile, in the town square, protests had started to form. On one side were residents demanding accountability and a complete overhaul of the police department. Signs reading, "Justice for all," and "End abuse of power," waved high as chants echoed through the streets. On the other side were a smaller group of locals defending Carter and Reed, claiming the deputies were being unfairly targeted. They were just doing their jobs. One man shouted into a megaphone, "This town doesn't need outsiders telling us how to run things." The divide was palpable, and Lucas knew he had to address it. That afternoon, he called for a town hall meeting, inviting residents to speak openly about their concerns. The meeting was held in the community center, which quickly filled to capacity. Reporters lined the back wall, cameras rolling as residents filed in, their faces a mix of anger, hope, and curiosity. Lucas stood at the front of the room, flanked by Captain Lane and the Internal Affairs agents. "Thank you all for coming," Lucas began, his voice carrying over the murmurs. "I've been here less than a week, but it's clear to me that Millhaven is at a crossroads. Yesterday's events were a symptom of a much larger issue. And I'm here to listen to you, every single one of you." The first to speak was the young woman who had defended Lucas in the square. "My name is Erin Daniels," she said, her voice strong. "I've lived in Millhaven my whole life. And Carter and Reed have been pulling this crap for years. They'd stop people for no reason, humiliate them, and laugh about it like it was a game. It's about time someone did something." Her statement was met with applause from half the room and glares from the other half. Next was a middle-aged man in a flannel shirt, "Look, I don't condone what they did," he said, "but those deputies kept this town safe. Outsiders don't understand what it's like here. We've got to protect our own." The room erupted into a heated debate, with residents shouting over one another. Lucas raised a hand, and the noise slowly subsided. "This isn't about insiders or outsiders," he said firmly. "It's about trust. A police badge is a symbol of service, not power. If we lose sight of that, we lose the very foundation of what keeps a community safe." The room fell quiet as his words sank in. By the end of the meeting, Lucas had heard stories from dozens of residents, some praising the deputies for their perceived toughness, others recounting tales of intimidation and injustice. The divide was undeniable, but so was the demand for change. The next morning, Lucas called a press conference to announce the department's next steps. Flanked by Captain Lane and the internal affairs agents, he outlined a sweeping reform plan: mandatory training, independent oversight, and a complete review of every officer's conduct. Carter and Reed's fates were also sealed. The internal affairs investigation uncovered years of misconduct, from falsified reports to excessive force. The deputies were arrested on charges of abuse of power and misconduct, their badges stripped for good. As the dust began to settle, Lucas knew the hardest part was yet to come. Changing a culture so deeply ingrained would take time, patience, and unwavering determination. But the spark had been lit, and Millhaven was finally waking up. The days following Carter and Reed's arrests were a whirlwind. The scandal had thrust Millhaven into the national spotlight, and the small town struggled to adapt to its newfound fame, or infamy. Journalists swarmed the streets, interviewing residents and documenting the protests that continued to split the community. Lucas Ryder, now a household name, found himself walking a tightrope between enforcing justice and rebuilding trust. Lucas sat in his office late one evening, the light from his desk lamp illuminating the stacks of paperwork in front of him. Reports of past misconduct, anonymous tips about corruption, and community complaints poured in daily. Some were credible, others seemed exaggerated, fueled by the frenzy surrounding the scandal. Regardless, Lucas treated each one with the same level of seriousness. He picked up a file labeled Deputy Carter, Incident Number 27. It was from 3 years ago, detailing an excessive use of force complaint that had been dismissed by Carter's superior at the time. Lucas's jaw tightened as he read the account of a teenager who had been handcuffed and paraded through town for a minor infraction. The complaint had been marked as resolved, but there was no evidence of an investigation. Lucas leaned back in his chair, the weight of his mission pressing down on him. This wasn't just about Carter and Reed, it was about dismantling a system that had allowed such behavior to flourish. The morning of Carter and Reed's arraignment was tense. The courtroom was packed with reporters, community members, and police officers. Lucas attended in his official capacity, his badge gleaming on his chest. He knew this moment was critical, not just for the two deputies, but for the entire town. The prosecution presented damning evidence, including video clips, eyewitness testimonies, and internal memos showing a pattern of misconduct. Carter and Reed's defense argued that their actions were part of a local tradition meant to maintain order. But the judge wasn't swayed. By the end of the hearing, the two former deputies were denied bail and remanded for trial. As they were led out in handcuffs, the cameras captured their defeated expressions. The footage went viral within hours, serving as a stark reminder of the consequences of unchecked power. Back at the station, Lucas gathered the remaining officers for a mandatory meeting. The tension in the room was palpable as he stepped to the front. his eyes scanning the faces of his team. Some looked hopeful, others guarded, but all were waiting to see what their new chief would say. "Let me make one thing clear," Lucas began, his voice steady. "This department is not beyond redemption. But it will not survive unless we change, together." He outlined his vision for a reformed police force: transparency in decision-making, zero tolerance for misconduct, and a renewed focus on community engagement. He also announced the formation of an independent oversight committee, composed of residents and external auditors, to review departmental policies and investigate complaints. To drive the point home, Lucas introduced a new training program, designed to teach de-escalation techniques and reinforce the principles of service and respect. "We are here to protect this town," he concluded, "not to intimidate it." As the officers filed out, Lucas noticed Captain Lane lingering behind. "Chief," she said, her tone reflective, "I think you're doing the right thing. But it's going to be a long road." Lucas nodded. "I know, but it's a road worth taking." Over the next few weeks, the town began to heal. The protests dwindled, replaced by town hall meetings where residents and police officers could openly discuss their concerns. Erin Daniels, the young woman who had spoken out during the incident, became a vocal advocate for change, working with Lucas to bridge the divide between the department and the community. One of the most symbolic moments came during a community cleanup event. Residents, officers, and even reporters joined forces to restore the square where Lucas had once been tied to the lamppost. The pole itself was removed, replaced with a plaque that read, "In memory of justice restored." Months passed, and while the scandal remained a dark chapter in Millhaven's history, it also became a turning point. The police department underwent a transformation, earning back the trust of the residents it served. Lucas's leadership was hailed as a model for accountability, and other small towns began adopting similar reforms. As for Lucas, he stayed true to his mission. Late one evening, as he walked down Main Street, he noticed something that hadn't been there before: genuine smiles and waves from the townspeople. Millhaven was no longer a place of hidden traditions and unchecked power, it was a community moving forward. Lucas paused at the edge of the square, taking a moment to reflect. The road had been long and fraught with challenges, but the fight had been worth it. He had come to Millhaven to bring justice, but he had found something more: a town willing to change. And a reminder that one person, standing firm, could make a difference. The video that had started it all remained online, a stark reminder of how far the town had come. But now, it was joined by another clip, a short documentary highlighting Millhaven's transformation. In the final frame, Lucas's voice could be heard saying, "Change isn't easy, but it's necessary, and it starts with accountability, for everyone." The screen faded to black, but the story of Millhaven continued, a beacon of hope for those willing to fight for what's right. The story of Lucas Ryder and Millhaven teaches us a powerful lesson. Justice and integrity are not just lofty ideals, they are the backbone of any thriving community. When authority goes unchecked, it is not just the victims who suffer but the entire fabric of society. Lucas's journey reminds us that change begins with accountability, courage, and the willingness to stand up for what is right, even when it's uncomfortable. In today's world, these lessons resonate more than ever. Whether in a small town or a big city, it's our collective responsibility to ensure that power is wielded with humility and respect. As individuals, we must question injustice, hold ourselves to higher standards, and work together to create a better, fairer future. To all of you across the US and Europe watching this story, remember, The fight for fairness and equality is universal. It crosses borders and cultures, uniting us in the shared pursuit of a more just world. If you found this story inspiring, moving, or thought-provoking, we invite you to join our community. By subscribing to this channel, you'll never miss an opportunity to hear more powerful stories of courage, resilience, and change. And the best part, it's absolutely free. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications to stay updated with our latest and most captivating stories. Thumbs up, don't forget to like, share, and comment. We'd love to hear your thoughts on this tale and what it means to you. Thank you for your support, and we'll see you in the next story. Together, let's continue to explore the human spirit and the power of change.